Let's move on immediately to the next speaker, Bruce Sterling. Bruce is a writer, a sci-fi writer. He's an incredible blogger. Sometimes I have the impression that words just fly out of his fingers into his blog because you don't know exactly how can he do it that fast. He's also Lyft's big thinker in residence somehow because he has spoken already twice at the Lyft conference on different topics than the one today. This is his third speech as Lyft. So here is our resident big thinker, Bruce Sterling.
Hi there, thanks for having me. I'm going to speak very slowly because I know the translators are suffering, the brave translators. So I like to write a lot about ubiquitous computing. And I know that Korea is one of the national capitals of ubiquitous computing.
Bruce, sorry to interrupt. You really need to take that thing off because we hear it through the...
Oh, you can hear it through the microphone?
Through the microphone.
Oh, that's a shame.
Sorry. I know you like to multitask in several languages, but thank you.
That's all right. I know that Korea is very big on ubiquitous computing, and I've written on that topic on some length. But I got very interested in cellular phones because I think cellular phones are the application of ubiquitous computing that is not science fiction. So I want to approach this topic from a different way, and rather than talking about the high-tech world of ubiquitous computing, I want to talk about the poor world with no computing and talk about poverty. Now, there are two kinds of poverty. The first kind is people who have no money. And the second kind is people who can't make any money. All right, the people who can't make any money are going to stay poor. There's really not much cure for them. All we can do is sort of help them and look after them. But there are a lot of people who are very capable of making money who are shut out from that possibility by the current financial system. Now, it used to be that there was a problem with material poverty in the sense that people didn't have any way to make money. They just didn't have the infrastructure. And this kind of classical poverty was peasant poverty. It was the life of peasants who were tied to the soil and were just scraping out a living with hand tools. And most people in the world who were poor were peasants. And that was the old poverty. But now we have 21st century poverty. And what's different about it? Well, the new poverty is urban, because the peasants all around the world are leaving their farms and they're moving into cities. I mean, more than half of the people in the world live in cities now. And the fastest growing cities are some of the poorest cities. There are places like Lagos in Nigeria, Sao Paulo, Mumbai. This urban migration is happening all over the world, and especially in poor countries. And the second thing that's different about modern poverty is that it's much better connected. It just has better connectivity. Part of it is that people are living in cities, but part of it is that the poor have cell phones. Now, people used to talk about the computer divide quite a lot. There were those of us who were computer literate and had computers, and there were those who had none. So there was a division between the computer wealthy and the computer poor. There is no cell phone divide. It doesn't exist. People are really surprised and even kind of alarmed at how eager the poor are to have cell phones. In India, the cell phone user base in 2008 is expanding at 6 million people a month. 6 million Indians this month got cell phone accounts. And those are just the accounts, because typically in India, a whole family will share a cell phone. That means cell phones are saturating India. Illiterate people are using cell phones. There are people who can't read and who buy cell phones. And they have a lot of use for them. So the poor in these big cities with cell phones, they are not the old poor. These are big city people. And like most people in big cities, they're rather sophisticated people. They just don't have money. They don't have banking services and they don't have financial services. But they do have some of these cell phone-based payment services, as David was describing. M-Pesa in Kenya, GCash in the Philippines, Hello Money in India, Obo Pay, which is a United States company which is in collaboration with the Grameen Bank from Bangladesh. These are new financial services based on cell phones owned by the modern poor. And to me, this looks like disruptive innovation. It's not an add-on to the banks that rich people already have. These are millions of people being brought into really a parallel financial system. When you have a technology that's bringing in millions of new users who have their own motives, that's a disruption to the old way of doing business. I don't think these are banks as we understand them. I think we're seeing the invention of a kind of anti-bank here. Or maybe even a kind of anti-money. Who is it who doesn't like cash? It's not people who already have cash and want something new and more fancy. The really interested parties here are people who have never had cash. People with just no money. Those are the ones who really want electronic money. These are the people whose lives can be really transformed by this technology. You know, not me, an American who has a credit card and, banker finance and a credit history. The people this really matters to are the new urban poor. These are the stakeholders in the post-cash economy, I think. And there are hundreds of millions of them, and they are young. Now, what does this mean to Koreans? You're not a poor country. You're a rich country. You're a rich, sophisticated, high-technology country. You're in the OECD, the Organization for Economic Development. You're in the Rich Persons Club of Nations. Why would you care about poor people's electronic money? Obviously, what you should be interested in would be some broadband ubiquity super bank money for your broadband Korean cell phones. Maybe with some kind of link to Cyworld so you could have some really exciting social networking money. Well, I don't think that future That future will happen, but I don't think that future is very important to you. I suspect that your great contribution to electronic money, if you make one in Korea, will be North Korea. North Korea, which is full of old poverty, desperate poverty, and living right next to a broadband super country. There isn't a place in the world with more electronic contrast than North Korea and South Korea. Now, will the regime in North Korea collapse? Yes. All governments collapse eventually, all regimes collapse eventually. But a regime that cannot feed itself and is not advancing economically is just going to look more and more archaic as time goes on. Sooner or later, North Korea will collapse. Their atomic bombs won't help them. Now, who is going to do anything about that situation? Will it be the Chinese? And they could expand into North Korea. They're a prosperous country, but they kind of have a lot of land empire troubles already. They've got Tibet, they've got Xinjiang. Why would they want North Korea? Would Russia do it? They could conceivably, but they've got the Caucasus and their own former countries to deal with. How about the Japanese? I mean, they used to own North Korea. Well, the Japanese are kind of elderly and tired now. I really don't think the Japanese want to go into North Korea. Could the United States take over a collapsed North Korea? Well, the United States likes to invade countries, and the United States likes to have military bases in countries. But after the Iraq experience, I don't think the Americans are really eager to do anything about North Korea. Do you think the world community, perhaps the United Nations, could do something about a collapsed North Korea? I don't see that that's very plausible. I don't understand where they would find the resources or the talent or the ability to do it. So I reason, as a futurist, that if North Korea collapses, South Korea owns it. I mean, it's your problem. And you did not destroy that country, but it's going to collapse, and there's nobody who can do anything about it except their fellow Koreans on this peninsula. Now, I know that doesn't sound very encouraging because, you know, if you read the headlines in today's Korean newspapers, you can see that there's like a currency crisis with the Korean won, and perhaps there would be a 1997-style Asian economic crisis all over again. And now you're telling me, you know, that we have to buy North Korea? Where are we going to find the economic strength to support this collapsed country when, you know, our economy is already looking a little unstable, and, you know, we have severe experiences with money and currency difficulties? Well, you're going to have to invent your way out of that problem. You're just going to have to come up with some brilliant scheme to go lift North Korea out of their desperate post-collapse poverty. And I don't think you can do it with conventional economic systems. I mean, like this rather beautiful South Korean banknote here. I mean, this is a really nice banknote, and it has like a beautiful hologram on it, and the printing's very handsome, and I admire it very much. But if you give this to a North Korean, it's not going to help their situation. They are poor, and they have never had cell phones. But as soon as the regime collapses, they're going to get cell phones because they're cheap and easy to get, and every poor person in the world has a cell phone. And they will go to cities, because all the poor people in the world are going to cities. Right now, the North Koreans are held in place. If they're not physically restrained, they're going to go to cities. They're not going to go to their own cities. If they're allowed into your country, they're going to go to your cities. You're going to have poor North Koreans with cell phones in your cities. That's what will happen. Now, what does a society look like after it has a really severe economic crash? Well, you could consider the historical example of West Germany and East Germany. Now, the West Germans faced a very similar problem when East Germany collapsed. And they thought, well, they're our brothers, and they just have a different economic system. So we'll just sort of replace their marks, their currency, with our currency, and we'll just sort of give them a lot of money, and then they'll sort of become like us, and it'll be just kind of a gentle transition. That doesn't really work. I mean, giving people in a former communist system Western cash does not make them into capitalists. It's a shock economy. Sometimes there's nothing left to shock. The communist economy is not like your economy, only different. North Korea's economy is just radically different to your economy. There's very little there that is of any commercial use to you. There are elements of the communist economy in North Korea that are worse than useless. It's not like it's the same as yours, only not as good. It's actually actively bad. It's not a society that you're going to simply be able to reform. You're really going to have to replace it completely. I mean, what you're going to have to do is what you've done since the end of the Korean War in the 1950s, when your society was a desperately poor, war-torn society. And over a 50-year period, you became one of the richest and most advanced countries in the world. Okay, with North Korea, you're going to have to compress that into a period of maybe 10 years, 15 years. And your advance was one of the most rapid ever in history. And yet you've got to do it in a scale that's 5 times as rapid if you're going to deal with North Korea, as I think you will have to do. You're going to have to invent some really new kinds of economic instruments here. I mean, you're really going to have to do something radical and unheard of in order to just like prevent the social instability that comes from absorbing a society, which is really so backward and so oppressed. If you fail to think this through, you're going to have the problems that other post-communist states had, which is things like privatization scandals, moguls dominating the economy, a lot of organized crime, shock therapy kinds of situations. You need to do better than that, and I suspect that you can and you will. I think you're going to invent this problem. You're going to invent the solution to this problem because your problem there is one of the most severe in the world. But that problem is also a great opportunity. I think you may come up with a Korean special solution for poverty here. An electronic Korean solution for poverty. Now, you're not going to apply it tomorrow because the North Korean regime is not going to collapse tomorrow. But I think it's time to start planning it. I really think you need to think about it, especially people in telecommunications and so forth. When you're working on cell phones, when you're working on the web, when you're working in electronic money and payment systems, you need to think, what if my user is a North Korean? How would I do this differently if I knew my user was from Pyongyang? that his regime had collapsed, his economy had collapsed, he was completely bewildered, and he'd never seen a cell phone or a computer in his life. And I intended to make him a productive and happy fellow citizen in 10 years. What kind of technology would I give that person? What kind of trading system, economic system? If you can solve that problem, and it is your problem, if you could solve that problem, it will have universal applications. There are poor people all over this world. We're not going to run out of them. If you can actually do something, you'll have done the entire world a great favor. Now, why would Koreans do this? Why does this seem plausible to me? Why do I think you will do it? It's because you've already done it. Now, in 50 years you did it. You took a society that was torn to shreds, bleeding, desperately poor, and turned it into an exciting and civilized and sophisticated, technically sophisticated, brilliant society. So I wish you good luck. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks, Bruce.